Hello, and salutations, my friends. Today, I'll be gracing you all with my review of Diabolic. And this game was developed by My Dream Forever and published by Red Twice Potato on March 26, 2018. Diabolic is basically an action-adventure game where you play as a knight in a dark fantasy world who is tasked with reporting an undead attack of the local villages to the king of the land. And to accomplish this, you will need to defeat enemies who attempt to halt your progress, while also completing side quests and exploring various points of interest, and yeah, that's essentially the game's entire story. It's not even enough to warrant an entire separate section, I have to say. As for the gameplay, you're given the ability to swing a sword, throw javelins, or use magic to defeat your enemies, and every time you complete a level, you're able to spend the coins that you collect from the defeated enemies to upgrade a certain stat related to those three attack styles, or a stat for your character themselves, such as increased movement speed. The sword ability is just a standard swing of your sword and nothing else. There isn't really much to say about it at its base level, but as you upgrade the ability, it starts gaining more utility. With one of the upgrades allowing you to start regenerating health for each enemy killed with the ability to increase the amount of healing per kill. The javelin throwing ability allows you to, well, throw a javelin at your enemies, and you'll want to make sure that you only use your javelin on enemies, as you'll only have a limited amount of them and they always seem to be in low supply. And while the base damage is pretty high, I'd say this is the weakest ability in the game, as it's just you have a limited supply as compared to magic, which you can just replenish your mana, or the melee where you can just infinitely swing. And I'd say that the upgrades simply make it more usable rather than powerful. And the upgrades mostly focus on increasing the number of javelins that you can store, along with the damage that they inflict and the ability to even add poison to your javelins. So, I mean, there's some utility there, but it's just not the best attacking style. And lastly, we have magic, which allows you to perform various types of magic, mainly fireballs, and you also get ice magic and other things like that down the road, but fireball will be your bread and butter for chunking high health enemies for pretty much all of the game. And I personally solely used magic and nothing else to chunk down bosses due to how overpowered it is. I simply used the sword for replenishing health, but yeah, the magic is the best ability in the game. And with the upgrades, it becomes even more overpowered as you're able to increase your mana reserves, mana regeneration, spell damage, and just a lot more. And yeah, the core gameplay loop is pretty straightforward. You progress through the levels, you defeat enemies, you earn coins, and then you use that currency to upgrade your abilities or character stats. And yeah, while this setup has potential, I think the problem is that it never expands beyond this, and there's honestly no meaningful evolution in the gameplay. What makes this lack of depth even worse is the steep difficulty spike that appears later in the game. At a certain point, the natural progression just becomes impossible without grinding or forcing players to repeatedly replay earlier levels just to afford upgrades. And a prime example of this is one of the gold generating bosses that I had to farm over and over and over again, and without it, upgrading would have taken forever. And yeah, sure, I completed the game in 2.5 hours, but that's only because I grinded this boss. And to make matters worse, the game punishes failure with a brutal death penalty. So if you die, any gold earned afterward is reduced, which adds a layer of forced grinding and makes progression feel even more like a chore than an achievement. And the combat system itself is imbalanced, as I've, explained earlier, which further amplifies the game's flaws, because magic is just so absurdly strong that it completely outclasses melee and ranged attacks, and melee combat is just only viable for healing off of weaker enemies, while javelins feel nearly useless in all scenarios. As you can simply see from the gameplay footage, I almost never used ranged intentionally, because it just simply wasn't worth it, outside of just a few puzzles and things like that. And yet another major issue about the game is the performance. Like, even with a simple visual style, the game suffers from noticeable lag, which is just completely unacceptable considering the size of this game and the scale of it, especially because other games that are far more elaborate and intensive are less demanding for my PC, and I can run it flawlessly. So this game is just not optimized at all. And here, I'll just even show a clip so you can see the performance issues and see how bad it can get. Like, this is ridiculous. And with the shallow gameplay loop, forced grinding, unbalanced mechanics, and poor optimization, the experience just quickly becomes dull. And after 30 minutes, the repetition just sets in, and from there, it's just a slow decline into boredom. So going into the artistic presentation, I'd say that the graphics are far from top tier, and frankly, they look like they're pulled straight from an asset pack. And I'm not saying they're from an asset pack, but they certainly give the look that they are, and the environments feel like they're just hastily assembled with little effort to make any cohesive or visually engaging landscapes. And even the enemies, which have a slightly better chance of being original, don't really impress me too much. And the bosses and mini bosses in particular are just downright ugly. Like, just look at the screen right now. Like, what even is this? And the sound design doesn't fare much better, but I think that it's better overall, because the sound effects seem to be lifted straight from a stock library with nothing unique and nothing memorable. And the attacks, hits, and ambient noises all sound generic, making the overall experience feel even cheaper. But as I alluded to, I don't think everything about the artistic presentation is a failure, actually. The music is genuinely a standout feature of the game, and I think it creates a pretty strong atmosphere that fits the game's theme pretty well, and it generally evokes like a feeling of a knight embarking on a solemn or somber journey through a bleak and distant land. And if you listen closely, the track playing in the background right now is from the game itself, and I think it does an excellent job in setting the tone. Unfortunately, even this strength is undercut by poor execution, as the tracks are short and they barely even last a minute long, and they also loop abruptly, breaking immersion and just feeling pretty jarring. And in some cases, they don't even loop at all, leaving you with nothing but a repetitive stock sound effects from your character doing whatever they're doing, like attacking enemies or whatever. And it's honestly a shame, because with better implementation, the music could have carried some of this game's artistic shortcomings, but instead it just highlights how little care they put into the rest of the game's presentation. So I tried removing this achievement hunting section in my previous video, but it just didn't feel right with me as an achievement hunter, so I brought it back. But for this game, it's pretty straightforward with the achievements. They're themed around completing the game with as little deaths as possible, and with a few requiring no deaths at all, and maxing out the damage of each attack style. And that's about it. It's straightforward, grindy, and it doesn't take much brain power to do. What I personally did to get all achievements was I grinded out the first boss, I maxed out my skills, and then I completed the rest of the game. It was an annoying grind, but it only really took me 2 hours and 30 minutes to complete the entire game, so it wasn't too bad, but yeah, your mileage will vary. So while some of you guys would say that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, sometimes that judgment is warranted. And when I initially decided to play Diabolic, I figured it would be pretty mediocre, but I wanted to try giving a smaller game a chance. But unfortunately, the game just couldn't prove me wrong, as nearly every aspect in it is just serviceable at best. I think that the gameplay quickly falls into a repetitive grind with an unbalanced combat system that heavily favors magic while making other playstyles feel pointless. The forced grinding due to the steep difficulty spikes only makes matters worse, and it turns progression into a tedious chore rather than an engaging challenge. And on top of that, poor optimization just leads to a frustrating performance overall, and this further drags down the experience, I'd say. Visually, the game lacks originality, and the environments and character designs feel generic and uninspired, and the sound design is equally lackluster, as the stock sound effects just fail to add any real atmosphere. And the one redeeming quality, the music, has potential, but it's just wasted due to the poor looping and implementation of inside of the game and everything else. And at its core, Diabolic is just a shallow, unpolished experience that never evolves beyond its basic mechanics. And while it had the foundation for something decent, I think the execution leaves much to be desired, and it's highly difficult to recommend. I would not recommend this game. And due to this, I'll be giving Diabolic a 2 out of 5 for both casual players and achievement hunters. So yeah, there are my thoughts on Diabolic. Hopefully they were an effective explanation on my experience with the game and what it has to offer. And if you have any further questions or want to share your thoughts on the game, just feel free to share them in the comments below. And if you enjoy this video, then liking it would help me out a ton. And I encourage you to subscribe for more content like this if you liked it. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm off now, and I hope you all take care.